My name is Isabel Tran. I'm 33 years old, and for most of my career, people looked at me and saw a department title, not a person. She's HR, they'd say, with a dismissive smile, a wave of the hand, or worse, a sigh when I walked into the room. Not a leader, not a strategist, just HR. The one who sent reminders about missing timesheets. The one who coordinated birthday cakes. The one who was there to hand over envelopes when someone was let go, even if I wasn't the one who made the decision. But while they were laughing, while they were mocking, while they were assuming I was invisible, I was watching and learning. Because HR may not make the big decisions, but we see them all. And I had a front row seat to every dirty deal, every whispered affair, every manipulated budget, every NDA-covered scandal. I didn't speak. I just listened. And one day, I realized I knew enough to burn them all down. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to light the match. It started like any other day. Morning coffee, a stack of resumes to review, a compliance policy to revise, then an email, subject line, meeting, HR structure optimization. The invite list was short, just the executive team and me. Strange. HR structure wasn't typically something that required the CFO, COO, and VP of operations. I opened the attached slide deck, 22 pages, all about streamlining HR oversight. Translation? They were trying to move me out. I wasn't surprised. I'd seen it coming. The new COO, Darren, had started asking questions about headcount redundancy 2 weeks ago. Then last Thursday, I noticed my internal access had been subtly restricted. A few payroll files, some legal archives. Nothing major, but enough to raise a flag. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't prepare. But what they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this exact moment for the past 18 months. I didn't react. Not on the surface. I walked into the boardroom at 10 a.m., sharp, smiled, took my seat, waited. Darren opened the meeting with his usual slick confidence. "We've been reviewing efficiencies," he said, clicking through slides, "and we think HR could operate more leanly, with a flatter structure. Isabel, your role would evolve into more of an advisory capacity, less operational, more strategic." I nodded. "Interesting?" He blinked, caught off guard by the lack of protest. Then the CEO chimed in. "Lisa, cold, crisp, calculated. It's not a demotion, Isabel, just a realignment. You'll still be involved in high-level matters, but the day-to-day will be handled by a new compliance manager. We've already identified a few candidates." There it was. The knife slipped between my ribs with a smile. I looked around the table. These were people I had onboarded, sat with, during performance reviews, helped cover up indiscretions for. They'd forgotten that HR wasn't just about people. It was about access, and I had access to everything. When the meeting ended, I shook hands, smiled, congratulated them on forward thinking. Then I returned to my office, closed the door, and opened the file I'd been building for months. Called it Exit Strategy for them. Inside, a dossier for every executive in that room, financial missteps, inappropriate relationships, hidden equity conflicts, emails that had never been deleted properly, Slack logs that hadn't been encrypted, whispered threats that I'd logged in real time. I didn't need to fabricate anything. The truth was messy enough. That evening, I sent 3 anonymous packages, one to the board of directors, one to an investigative journalist I knew from college, and one to the firm's largest investor. Inside, a USB drive, password protected. The password, just HR. They say HR is about managing people. I say it's about managing leverage, and when you hold enough of it, titles don't matter. Because the girl from HR, she's the one who knows where everybody is buried. And now, she's the one digging them back up. The first email came at 7:42 a.m., a simple request from the board for clarification on certain budget allocations within the compliance department. I smiled. That meant the first USB drive had been opened. They didn't know it was me yet, of course. I'd scrubbed metadata, rerouted the package through 3 third-party couriers, even used a burner laptop to encrypt the data. But the information inside, that was all theirs. raw, unfiltered, verified, executive misuse of funds, falsified reports, and a particularly damning string of internal messages between Darren and the outsourced contractor he'd been skimming. For 2 years, I had receipts, timestamps, audit trails. By 9 a.m., Darren was pacing the executive floor, phone glued to his ear, face tight. By 9:30, his calendar was cleared for the day. By 10:15, he was working remotely. He never returned, one down. The second package, the one I sent to the investigative journalist, hit a bit later. Around noon, I got a ping from a social account tied to her publication. Big story dropping tomorrow. Corruption inside a rising firm. Stay tuned. No names yet. Just smoke. But smoke always leads to fire, and the fire was coming. That afternoon, the CEO, Lisa, called a confidential leadership sync. Just the C-suite. I wasn't invited. Didn't matter. I had access to the meeting notes before it even ended. Apparently, they were addressing allegations internally and reaffirming core values. Translation: scrambling. I watched as they reassigned responsibilities, moved projects around, tried to contain the fallout. But the thing about rot is, it spreads, and when you bury truth under polish and buzzwords for long enough, it doesn't. Just crack the surface, it explodes. 2 days later, the article dropped. Front page: internal chaos at Crescendo Corp. Documents reveal years of executive misconduct. The journalist had done her job well. She didn't just print what I gave her. She expanded, investigated, verified with former employees who had been silenced with NDAs. One quote stood out: "There were things we all saw but weren't allowed to say. The moment you questioned leadership, you were branded difficult. Or worse, disloyal. They didn't name me, but I didn't need to be named. Anyone who mattered already knew." That same afternoon, I was called into a meeting with Lisa. Her assistant looked pale, her voice shaky. "Ms. Tran, the CEO would like to speak with you. Privately." Of course she would. I walked into her office like I owned it, because in a way, I already did. Lisa sat behind her desk, hands folded too neatly. She gestured to the chair. "Please." I stayed standing. She opened with false warmth. "Isabel, I want you to know that despite everything happening, we value your role here." I didn't respond. She shifted. "I understand you've been under pressure. With Darren gone, we'll need your help realigning some teams." Still nothing. Then she leaned forward, dropped the tone. "You and I both know this company is going through something it may not recover from. If there's anything you know, anything, you want to tell me, that now's the time." There it was. The bait, the silent accusation, the unspoken threat. I smiled, tilted my head slightly. "Lisa," I said, "you hired me to manage people, but I don't manage them the way you do." She blinked. "I don't manipulate." I remember. That evening, I sent the second wave. Not to the board. Not to the press, to the employees. An anonymous email with attachments. Internal ethics reports that had been buried. Payroll discrepancies. Complaint logs marked resolved that were anything but. All of it anonymized, except the people at the top. The email ended with one sentence. The truth wasn't supposed to stay hidden forever. The company Slack exploded. Emails flooded HR and I. I sat at home with a glass of wine, watching in real time as every carefully buried secret clawed its way into daylight. By Friday, Lisa was suspended pending investigation. By Monday, too bored I. Members had resigned. The HR inbox tripled in volume. And me? I was suddenly the most trusted person in the entire company. Because I'd told the truth. Quietly, surgically, without ever raising my voice. They underestimated the girl from HR. They always do, until the moment she stops filing paperwork and starts filing consequences. The silence didn't last long. After the second leak, the one that exposed how many complaints had been swept under rugs lined with stock options, the rest of the company realized something. No one was untouchable anymore. For years, employees had been told to follow protocol while watching that very protocol get rewritten for executives behind closed doors. Sexual harassment complaints redirected, overtime erased, promotions dangled, then revoked if you questioned too much. But now, those same employees were forwarding emails, uploading screenshots, dropping receipts in anonymous inboxes faster than legal could keep up. They weren't scared anymore, because someone had finally shown them what the other side of silence looked like. Power. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a whistleblower. I was just done pretending, done watching, done staying quiet while mediocrity and manipulation thrived under the protection of titles. So I changed the rules. My first act as acting head of company operations, a title I didn't ask for, but no one else had the authority or stability to claim, was to create a public ethics portal, transparent, unfiltered, reviewed weekly by a rotating employee committee, not just HR or legal. They called it bold, I called it overdue. I also reinstated every complaint that had been prematurely resolved under the old system, 78 in total. Some were small, some weren't. One involved a former VP who had bullied junior analysts for years, leaving a trail of NDAs and broken careers. He thought he was safe. He thought no one would come after him. He thought wrong, because buried in one of those complaints was a single sentence. He said, "No one will ever fire me. Policy doesn't apply to people like me." I read it 3 times, then called a meeting with legal. We reopened every file connected to him. The findings weren't just violations, they were patterns. And when we traced his behavior back through departmental records, we found something even worse. 4 managers who had helped cover it up quietly moved analysts off his team, told them to document everything, but never escalated. Some even gave him glowing performance reviews, and these weren't old files. These were last year, last quarter, last month. This wasn't ancient history. This was a system still operating as if nothing had changed. That ended today. I called the 4 managers into a room. No warning, no agenda. Just policy binders stacked in the center of the table, open to the pages they had ignored. They tried to explain. We were under pressure. He was connected to the board. There was no safe path forward. I let them speak. Then I slid a document across the table. Resignation agreements. All 4, signed by legal, effective immediately. They blinked. "You can't just—" "I can," I said. "Because unlike him, you knew better." Word spread fast. There were no press releases, no dramatic firings, just empty offices and silent Slack statuses that never turned green again. And the rest of the company? They started to breathe differently, walk differently, speak differently. Not out of fear, but out of something they hadn't felt in a long time. Accountability. Later that week, a senior engineer I barely knew passed me in the hallway. He paused, nodded once and said, "We didn't think anyone was watching. Turns out you were." I smiled, but said nothing. Because the truth is, I hadn't just been watching. I'd been recording, tracking, building, not to burn it all down, but to show them that the policies they wrote weren't just for the interns. They were for everyone. And now, everyone knew. One evening, I stayed late. The office was quiet, lights dimmed. I walked floor to floor, not to patrol, but to remember. The desks where voices had been silenced, the doors where promotions had been promised and revoked, the elevators where tears had been held until the descent. I paused outside the executive boardroom, once locked to me, now mine. I opened the door, sat at the head of the table, and whispered, to no one in particular. No one is above policy. Not anymore. You don't have to swing the sword to be guilty. Sometimes all it takes is standing by while someone else does. That's what no one wanted to admit. That silence, under the right light, looks a lot like complicity, and I was done letting people hide behind it. I had already taken down the obvious targets, the corrupt, the arrogant, the ones who left receipts in every shadow. But there were others. Quieter ones. People who hadn't stolen, harassed, or lied. But they watched it happen. They let it unfold. And they said nothing. One of them was Jonah Kim, head of product strategy. Polite. Sharp. Always neutral. He was the type of person who never picked a side, not out loud. He didn't protect the old leadership. But he didn't challenge it either. Back during the Redwood leak and the fallout that followed, he'd written me a private message. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You deserved better. That was it. No support in meetings, no name on the internal petition. Just a 5-second whisper 2 weeks after I was already gone. And now, he was still here, still quiet, still safe. But not for long. After the reinstated complaints hit the ethics portal, I noticed something. A handful of cases, ones that had been ignored the first time, had witnesses listed. Names of senior managers, directors, team leads, people who had heard or seen something, people who had let it slide. Jonah's name appeared twice. Once, in a complaint from a junior UX researcher who had flagged favoritism and verbal intimidation. And once in a side comment, I told Jonah. He said to document everything, then let it go. I reread that line, then scheduled a meeting. He arrived at my office right on time. Pressed shirt, calm face. Appreciate you making time, he said. I didn't respond. Just motioned to the chair. Do you know why you're here? A pause. Assuming. It has to do with the recent compliance reviews. I handed him a printout, highlighted statements, 2 of them, both naming him. He scanned them slowly. No panic. Just that same steady expression I used to mistake for professionalism. You didn't. Lie, I said. You didn't hurt anyone, but you also didn't protect them. He looked up. I wasn't in a position to— Yes, you were, I cut in. You had the trust, the access, the voice. He opened his mouth, closed it. I waited, then said, I'm giving you 2 options. 1, you publicly acknowledge what you saw and failed to report. You help us clean up the very culture you once stayed silent in. Or 2, you step down. His jaw tightened. You'd push me out for not doing enough? I leaned forward. No. I'd push you out for thinking that was ever acceptable by— End of day, Jonah submitted a statement. Voluntary, honest, painfully overdue. It was posted to the internal ethics channel the next morning, and it started something I didn't expect. Others followed. Managers, team leads, even a former VP who'd left a year ago. They all wrote in, confessing what they'd ignored, regretting who they hadn't stood up for, acknowledging the damage silence can do. Some meant it, some were just covering themselves. But that wasn't the point. The point was, the culture had shifted. No more neutrality. You were either part of the rebuild, or you were in the way. That week I hosted a company-wide town hall. No scripts, no branding, just me. A mic. And a room full of people who had either suffered or stood by. I said this. I don't care if you were here 5 years or 5 days. I don't care if you were complicit or cowardly. What matters now is this. If you stay silent, again, you will not be here much longer. This is not a place where silence is safe. I stepped off stage to dead quiet. Then someone started clapping, and the room followed. That night, I stayed in the office late. Not to work, just to breathe. To sit in the quiet and think about all the times I had waited for someone else to speak. They hadn't, so I did. And now, they finally were. I thought I'd rooted them all out. The corrupt, the complicit, the cowards. I'd dragged every name out from the shadows, every policy breaker and silence seller. The company was cleaner than it had ever been. Safer. But something didn't sit right. It wasn't a headline. Not a complaint. Just a feeling. A pattern that didn't match the rest. Budgets that shifted too smoothly. Decisions that arrived before I'd approved them. Conversations that felt too rehearsed. Then, a name surfaced, Adrian Shaw. On paper, he was nothing special. Senior counsel, not even the top legal lead. Kept to himself, never made waves, never got mentioned in the old complaints, but his name kept popping up in the background. He wasn't the one approving shady NDAs. He was the one writing the language, the one suggesting who should be looped out of meetings, the one who always said, legally, we're covered. He'd never been a villain in anyone's story, because he was smart enough to stay off stage. But backstage? He was directing more than I realized. I scheduled a meeting with him, informal, no agenda. He showed up right on time. Tailored suit, no tie, calm eyes. "Isabel," he said smoothly. "Congratulations on the cultural pivot. Everyone seems very aligned these days." I smiled. Alignment is easier when people are held accountable. He nodded, unbothered. Of course. Though I imagine some people are starting to feel a bit exposed. I tilted my head. "Are you one of them?" Chuckled. "Not at all. I've always kept things above board." "You've kept things untraceable," I corrected. Silence. Just long enough to confirm everything I needed to know. After he left, I pulled records, internal reviews, emails, legal memos. I ran them through a tool our compliance team had developed. Keyword tracking, behavioral clustering. Adrian's name wasn't attached to scandals, but he was always near them. The approval next to the approval. The CC line in an email that magically disappeared when lawsuits started. The legalese that buried ethics violations under interpretation. He was the firewall between the rot and the consequence. And worse, he was still doing it. I confronted him 3 days later, not in my office, in his. He was reviewing documents when I walked in unannounced. "I'm revoking your access to all current legal workflows," I said. He didn't look up. "Based on what?" "Based on patterns," I replied. "Based on the kind of silence that doesn't scream, it whispers." He closed the file. Leaned back, smiled. "You've done well, Isabel, truly. But don't mistake power for immunity." I didn't blink. "I never have. You did." That night, I called a private board session, presented everything, nothing illegal, but enough to show a deliberate pattern of obstruction, misdirection, and quiet manipulation, all under the guise of legal support. The board asked me one question. "Why now?" I said, "Because we've removed every other parasite. But you can't cure the system if you leave the one person who keeps it sick sitting in the control room." Vote passed. Unanimous, Adrian Shaw was out. But he didn't go quietly. The next morning, a leak hit the press. Nothing devastating. Just enough to raise doubt. A quote, anonymous, claiming the new regime at the company was vindictive, hungry for power, retaliatory. It wasn't hard to guess the source, and it didn't matter, because for the first time, the press didn't run with it blindly. They called me for comment, and I gave them one line. Truth is not retaliation, and cleaning house isn't a power grab. It's hygiene. The article ran the next day. Headline: The woman who cleaned out the empire, one policy at a time. Later that week, I found a note on my desk. No envelope. No signature, just a single sentence. You were never supposed to make it this far. I folded it once, dropped it in the shredder, then got back to work. Because that was the difference between them and me. They never considered me. And now, they can't stop watching. Power once taken must be redefined. I wasn't interested in simply replacing the old guard. I wanted to erase the entire mold they came from. What's the point of overthrowing a broken regime if you keep walking its same halls, wearing its same language, using its same rules? I didn't just want revenge. I wanted reinvention. The first step was simple. I changed the floor plan. Literally. The executive wing? Gone. Knocked down. Converted into open collaboration zones and rotating. Strategy pods. No one, not even me, had a private office anymore. Hierarchy didn't disappear, but it stopped being a fortress. Now, if you wanted power, you had to face the people who gave it to you. Next, compensation. I commissioned a full internal salary audit. The results? Predictable, top-heavy, gender-skewed, loyalty-based instead of performance-based. We tore it apart. Published new ranges, transparent, role-based, audited biannually. The pushback was immediate. Senior managers who'd spent a decade coasting on old deals suddenly realized they'd be paid by results, not resume some left. Didn't stop them. This wasn't a place for legacy status anymore. This was a place for earned relevance. Then came the policy shift. We launched a whistleblower platform, not buried under HR, but directly overseen by an independent ethics board. Rotating. Members elected by employees. One former director called it dangerous populism. I called it accountability, because when people know they can't hide behind process, they stop weaponizing process. I hosted monthly town halls, not to talk at people, to listen. Anonymous questions, live votes, open criticism. Once, an intern asked me why I hadn't addressed the delays in product feedback cycles. He was right. We restructured the process that week. 2 months later, product development timelines dropped by 17%. And that intern? He now runs an innovation team of 10. Not because I handed it to him, because he proved he belonged in the room. Of course, not everyone cheered. The old names, the ones who still lurked on LinkedIn and industry panels, began whispering that I was too radical, that I was sacrificing tradition for disruption, that I was rebuilding a company no one would recognize. They were right. That was the point. One afternoon, I received a lunch invite from a former CEO of ours, the one before Lisa. Retired. Now, but still active in investment circles, we met at a quiet restaurant uptown. He smiled like he was still in control. "I've been hearing interesting things," he said. "You've made quite the name for yourself." "I didn't need to," I replied. "You all said it for me." He chuckled. "You've made a lot of changes, not all of them popular." "I wasn't hired to be popular," I said. He leaned in. "You know, some of us liked things the way they were." I sipped my tea. "And some of you liked silence, until it started talking back." He didn't invite me again. Back at the office, a junior employee stopped me by the elevator. She looked nervous, almost like she didn't know if she was allowed to speak. Can I just say, this company used to scare me. Now, it inspires me. I nodded once. Didn't say a word, because sometimes you don't need a speech. You just need the system to work the way it should have all along. They say the company is unrecognizable now. They're right, because it's no longer built on silence. It's built on clarity, on proof, on earned power. And anyone who doesn't recognize it was never supposed to be here in the first place. It's strange how quiet power is when it finally arrives. There's no fanfare, no spotlight, no dramatic climax. One day, you're clawing your way into the room. The next, the room is already arranged to your standards, and no one questions how it got that way. That's when you realize you're not asking for permission anymore. You're not fighting for space. You've become the gravity that others orbit. And that's where I stood, not above anyone, just beyond their reach. 6 months had passed since the last internal restructure. Turnover was the lowest it had ever been. Revenue was steady. More importantly, morale was high. Real. Earned. People didn't just work here. They believed in what we were building. But outside, the noise hadn't stopped. A well-known business blog published a hit piece. "Too much power, too fast. Can Isabel Tran be trusted?" It quoted anonymous sources, called me uncontested, untouchable, a potential liability if unchecked. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because unlike the people who wrote those pieces, I didn't answer to fear or flattery or familiarity. I answered to results, and the results spoke for themselves. One morning, I walked past a glass-walled conference room and heard my name. A visiting executive was speaking to my CFO. "She's impressive," he said, "but doesn't she scare you a little?" The CFO didn't know I was listening. His answer? "She scares the people who still think leadership looks like them." I smiled and kept walking. Later that week, I received an award, some industry honor, named after a man who'd never once hired a woman to lead a division. I declined it, politely, publicly. I posted a short statement. I didn't rebuild this company to win awards named by the people who once erased voices like mine. I built it so no one else would have to. That post hit 1.2 million views in 3 days. They asked me to reconsider. I didn't respond. There were moments, late at night, when I'd walk through the old parts of the building, places that used to feel cold, small, distant. Now they felt quiet in a different way. Resolved, settled. I stopped once outside the old HR file room, where I used to sit behind a desk with no authority, no budget, no seat at any table. I opened the door. It had been converted into a mentorship space. Glass walls, whiteboards, fresh light. It looked nothing like it used to. That was the point. People often ask me now, what does it feel like to have made it this far? My answer, I didn't make it. I made it. I didn't climb their ladder. I tore it down and built something they didn't understand, and still don't. That's why they keep asking the wrong question. It's not, who do you report to now? It's, how do you keep going without looking back? The answer? Because there's nothing back there worth returning to. Only silence, only ceilings, only names on doors that no longer exist. Now, when people speak my name, they do it carefully. Some with awe, some with resentment, some with curiosity. But always, always with respect. Because I don't answer to them. I never did. They just never realized it until it was too late.